And while those searches are still a small fraction of the entire search volume, uh, it's not something that somebody should just sort of rest their head on and say, okay, we're fine for a while, because you're not.
Welcome to Accelerated Velocity, the podcast that helps you move faster, smarter, and more strategically in the rapidly evolving world of AI. We'll break down the latest AI news and innovations and explore how they impact your marketing, sales, and business growth. We'll dive into practical use cases, unpack new tools, and cut through the noise so you and your team can adapt with confidence. I'm Grace Matthews, Director of Content at Inbound AV, a business development agency and HubSpot solutions partner dedicated to driving sustainable business growth. Each week, I'll be here with Peter Malik, our CEO and founder. Join us as we make sense of what's changing and what to do about it. Hello, and welcome to Accelerated Velocity. This is Grace, and today Peter and I are going to be talking about continuing competition in AI.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting subject, especially in light of some news that came out this week. And we are recording this on May 22nd, just so you know, because a week may go by and it's not going to be news at all. It'll be something more exciting. But there's some really interesting news. Grace, I wanted to start off with just talking about a little success that we had in context of conversations that we've had before. And if you've been listening to our past episodes, we've been talking a lot about AEO, and essentially that is AI's version of SEO and replacing the traditional chat of Google, Bing, and the other smaller players with really a question-based answer system, and very, very different from what the typical Google search results would be. And we've talked about that quite a bit. And I want to tell you about a client of ours who really was on this very, very early, and we built a number of landing pages for them. And the first thing, and I don't know if we've discussed this specifically here, but essentially the doorway to get into AI search, the door that you have to go through is schema markup. And so schema markup is a way of organizing a website. And AI, number one, looks for schema markup on a website. If they don't find it, they're kind of on to the next site because it's easier for them to analyze and make use of data on a site that's been built with schema markup. So the site that we worked on is kind of like an Upwork based on the blockchain. Really, really interesting company. And specifically, we did some pages about finding a Python coder in North America or in Great Britain or whatever it may be. And so I'm looking at the search that I just did on Google, which was an AI result search. The search was, how much does it cost to hire a DevOps engineer? And it returned, as it usually returns, a bullet-pointed list of various points. And if I look at the right side of that search result, the top result that they drew from is the landing page that we built. And again, it's specifically because it used schema markup. And then as far as the content of the page itself, it was built with AI search in mind. And in fact, it came up as the number one result. And there's a link there to actually get somebody to a site, which a lot of searches right now just deliver information with, as they call them, zero-click searches, which is because nobody clicks on anything and they leave. So I just want to mention that, we're always looking for validation. We're looking for validation of what we're trying to do to stay up to date and be ahead of this massive change in AI. And so that validation in this work that we did quite a few months ago is really, really gratifying.
And Peter, can I just ask you, for those of us who might not know, what resources are needed to achieve a well-functioning schema markup?
So, well, I think a great place to start is schema.org has a resource where it'll actually go into your site and look for schema markup. And so you can identify if the developer, who you may not know if you even have it on your site, you might, has added it, and also what he's added it to. Now, in AI search, there are certain things, for instance, an FAQ page. That's the type of content in your site that you really want schema markup on. A pricing page, not so much. So it's not like you have to enable schema markup for every part of your site, but there are certain things that are very AEO friendly, and that's what you really need to have schema markup on. So that's a great place to start. And as far as if you need help with it, you can reach out to an agency like ours, and there are a number of others all around. I think doing an AEI search will bring up some interesting stuff.
Awesome. Thank you for that overview. And I know that we're also seeing increasing competition brewing with this kind of like AI-driven search race, especially with some pressures on Google. Should we dive into that now, Peter?
Absolutely. And I think that the number one on my list is the Comet browser, which we mentioned last week. But that's a browser being launched, or actually has been launched, by Perplexity. And unfortunately, I'm still on the waiting list. I don't know about you, Grace, but so we haven't had a chance.
Far down on the waiting list.
All right, I hope I'm in the top million, but we'll see. But anyway, it's something I'm really interested in simply because it's been designed around AEO and AI search results. And I think it very likely is a big step forward as far as not so much like with the Google ecosystem, you have Chrome. Chrome is a very, very well-established browser, but Chrome was not built specifically for AI search, and Comet has been. So I'm really interested in seeing what the results are and how that impacts us. And it really sort of, ups the game for Google and Chrome.
Yeah, and I'll just mention that on top of that, for those of us who still are on the waiting list, it seems like there are an increasing amount of people just maybe even without actively thinking about it, turning to ChatGPT or Perplexity's chat-based model or other LLMs to conduct searches that are then going out onto the web to gather information. So even for those of us who might not be using a completely AEO-based browser yet, there are still these kind of building pressures competing with traditional Google search and Google's AI overview and all of that.
No, absolutely. And while those searches are still a small fraction of the entire search volume, uh, it's not something that somebody should just sort of rest their head on and say, okay, we're fine for a while, because you're not. I mean, this could change literally overnight.
Yeah, and on top of that, not super recent at this point, but some other news that we haven't covered since our last discussion on AEO is the news that Apple might not be renewing their contract with Google to default to using Google on Safari, regardless of whether that happens or not. I think it kind of signals to the way that things are shifting.
Yeah, I think, part of Google's model is to make everybody totally dependent on Google. And honestly, I mean, our company, we're on Gmail, business Gmail, and it would be really, really hard for us to leave that ecosystem right now. They have been successful in making us dependent on their platform, which isn't a great feeling, honestly, but that's the reality. And I think that Apple wanting to get away from that ecosystem, where if you do a Google search, a search that ends up on Google by default on Safari, it's actually going to have a little pop-up. It's like, hey, don't you want to do this on Chrome? So, Apple cut a deal where the people who are providing the content are also saying, like, you don't need this browser anymore. That's a bad deal. It's a really bad deal. And so I think that them considering one of the sort of from the ground up LLMs is a great move on their part.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that whole thing with the pop-ups is not just bad for Apple, but it's bad for the user experience as well. So, I mean, from my perspective, we're also seeing users actively seeking out alternative options, which is an interesting shakeup. That being said, I would say Google is still in the race with the use of AI overview. 2 days ago, which would be May 20th, at the time we're recording this, they released AI mode in the US, which is a new chatbot style search mode. So that's going to enhance that experience of chat-based search even further. They're also driving a lot of progress on Gemini with their other AI tool, Notebook LM. So they are still, working quickly to keep up with these rapid changes. But I know that you have thoughts on that, Peter, as well.
Yeah, I mean, actually, so we were trying out this new AI search on Google just before we started recording this. And in fact, one of the links that Google said to click wasn't on the search page. So it's maybe rolled out, but it's kind of rolled out. And I'm sure that'll change quickly, but that's where it's at. But yeah, I mean, I think Google is a behemoth. It's one of the biggest companies in the world. And the fact that they're able to move as fast as they are in all of these areas, these AI eras with, Notebook LM, which is just like from outer space. When they dropped that, it was just beyond anything anybody else was working on. It was just, there's some really serious minds at Google, obviously, would have been forever. But at the same time, are they able to visualize and understand the next wave of AI, which will include devices? It will include things like the Comet browser. And that's really my question is like, we've talked about, your generation, Grace, which is digital natives, right? And now we're kind of looking at AI natives, and the companies that are really going to make the biggest impact they weren't born with AI as something they did every day, but nevertheless, you could call them AI natives because that's where they live and that's what they understand, and they've come by it honestly. So that would be my question: is Google going to be able to keep up with the AI natives, or maybe they'll hire all of them? But and that brings up the big news of the week.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned devices because that was definitely on my radar for today. Sam Altman acquired Jony Ive's startup and his entire team for I can't remember what was it, 6.5 billion?
6.2 billion. But who's going to quibble over a few $100 million?
And so Jony Ive was the original iPhone and Apple Watch designer. There's some speculation about what he might be working on for OpenAI, which, by the way, it's a non-exclusive contract, so the startup will continue to work on other projects as well. But there is a lot of speculation that the work will be regarding some sort of augmented reality device that intakes information from a user's surroundings via microphone, maybe via camera, and connects to users' phones to do what we don't exactly know yet, but likely perform a number of assistant-style tasks based on the user's experience.
Yeah, and I think I'd even take it a step further than that. I mean, we don't know exactly what this is, but where it's headed is really replacing our communication devices as we know it. That, the Apple Watch or, Fitbit or whatever, smartwatch you want to use, iPhone, all of the Android devices, that I would speculate that that's the big play, is they're really not just looking at something that attaches to a smartphone, but replaces the smartphone. And that could change everything for a company like Apple, for a company like Google, is they're so invested in the Android's ecosystem. But, it will just sort of add to the tsunami of change that we're in right now.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I'll speak as somebody who's used almost exclusively Apple devices for years, including a couple times when I tried to move away from that and get something other than a MacBook Pro or something other than an iPhone, and kept coming back to those tools because that's what I knew. I think it's really interesting that we're entering this era where there's arguably going to be more user choice, not just with the apps that we're turning to, but potentially even the interfaces that we're gravitating towards to kind of get the most ideal user experience out of all of these new AI tools that are arising.
Yeah, and as somebody who, my history, I was building IBM clones as a side hustle, like in the late '80s, and then again, my history is a musician, and so around 2000, I wanted to record on my computer, and IBM, Microsoft operating system, was not happening. It just was almost impossible. And so that's where I got my first Mac, and I bought a little Pro Tools interface at the time. Was kind of their entry-level model and Pro Tools software. And I was off to the races and never looked back. And I've never used anything but an Apple device for whatever it is, 26 years, probably, something like that.
So would you personally rethink that if something came out that totally reshaped the way you were interfacing with a digital device that you carried around everywhere?
Absolutely. I think that Apple's made amazing products. They've fallen behind in some ways. I mean, Siri is like an ancient computer that's on some post-apocalyptic world that just doesn't really know what's going on right now. And it's amazing to me that it's 10 years old, I think, 10 years old, and it still can't pronounce a street right. And I'm ready for the next thing. I'm kind of rogue in the way that I don't necessarily want to do business with the biggest company in the world, which would include Amazon and Apple and a couple others. So I'm excited about whatever's going to disrupt it. And it's not that whatever's going to disrupt it is going to be a tiny company. It's probably going to be a similar company, but at the same time, that's the cycle, and I embrace it.
So I want to bring up something a little bit on the wackier side, which is the wide variety of AI and augmented reality glasses. I don't know if you've been seeing this, Peter, but I'm seeing tons of ads for the Meta glasses. I personally would not go out and buy a pair of Meta glasses at this point, or probably any time in the foreseeable future. I know that Google and OpenAI and Apple are all trying to compete with these AI glasses that kind of, they can identify information about your surroundings and connect you to search to get answers, and you have questions about something. Would you try out those AI glasses, Peter?
I'm a fan of Ray-Bans, but it's interesting. People want to interact with the world in a real way, I think, at this point. So having goggles on is not something that a large portion of the population is really that excited about. And I don't know about you, but I'm one of the population that's not excited. But again, it's interesting to see the demos for that Apple, whatever they were called, or whatever they're still called, glasses were amazing. It's okay, I got a computer in front of my face, and I don't have to be sitting here in front of a computer. But at the same time, I guess the excitement wears off those things as soon as people start to either buy them and not use them, or buy them and experience quality of life problems because they're lost in them. So I have to say, I was looking at the timer on this, and I think that we've surpassed our optimal goal, which is to not be boring and get in, get you some good information and get out. And here we are a long time later, and we're still in. So I think we better get out.
Awesome. Fair enough, Peter. And I'll just let everybody know, as always, that you can find a summary and timestamps and links to our website and newsletter in the show notes. So that's all there for you. And thank you for listening to this week's episode of Accelerated Velocity.
We will see you next week.